Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Luffy ate the rumble fruit, the Logia type fruit, movie 1. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Let's begin this story. Now we've all heard the story of Monkey D. Luffy before. The boy who at 7 years old ate a devil fruit and became a rubber man. But what if instead of eating the gum fruit, Luffy ate a different fruit? What if that different fruit was a Logia type? And what if said Logia type was of a shocking nature? Well, let's find out how different Luffy would be. In Fushia village on Dawn Island located in the East Blue, is a bar called Party's Pub, and this place is currently filled to the brim with pirates. But not just any pirates, these are the red hair pirates. The red hairs have made Fushia village their base of operations for the time being. Now normally the people would not stand for this, and call them Marines, but the red hair pirates are nice, and fun-loving, and don't cause any trouble. They bring gold to the village, and fill its coffers, so they are allowed to stay. Sitting in Party's Pub at the bar are two people. One is a tall man with red hair with 3 scars running across his left eye, wearing an outfit that consists of a pair of loose brown pants, white shirt, a black cloak over his shoulders, and a straw hat on his head. This man is red-haired Shanks, the captain of the Red Hair Pirates. The other person sitting at the bar with him is a young boy of about 7 with dark hair, wearing a pair of shorts and a marine shirt. This boy is named Monkey D. Luffy, and currently he's telling Shanks how he's going to be a great marine someday. I'll be a great marine. I have a punch like a pistol. Shanks and his entire crew laugh at this, and Shanks says, I'm sure you do, Luffy, but you can't be a great marine with just a strong punch. For one, you're too young, and for another thing, you can't swim. That's why we call you Anchor. Luffy pouts at this and says, I can learn how to swim. And I'm not too young, I'm 7. Shanks lets out another large gaffe, only angering Luffy further, and turns to Makino the barmaid and says, Hey Makino, another glass of rum please. And can you make me something to eat? I'm starving. Makino looks at the man and smiles. She replies, Coming right up, Captain. She pours him another glass of rum and hands it to him. Then she turns to walk back into the kitchen to make some food. As she walks away, Shanks stares at her ass for a while. Because of this, he doesn't notice Luffy taking an interest in the chest sitting next to him on the bar. As Luffy looks at it, he thinks, I bet that chest is filled with all kinds of treasure. I wanna see what's inside. I know I'll just take a quick peek. While Shanks isn't looking, I'm sure he won't mind. And so with his mind set, he grabs the chest with his little hands, and he opens it up, peering inside it. He's excited at the prospect of the treasure within, but what he sees disappoints him slightly. All he finds inside is a single weird-looking fruit, but as he looks at the fruit, it seems to almost be glowing, crackling with electricity. Slowly, as if a moth drawn to flame, Luffy reaches inside the chest and removes the fruit. As he stares at it, his stomach growls, and so he decides he'll eat this strange fruit to see how it tastes, and so he quickly devours it. After swallowing the last bite, he notes that it was very sour and bitter. He lets out a mighty belch, and Shanks turns to him smiling and laughing and says, Boy Luffy, what happened? Eat too much food again? I told you that you should. At that moment, Shanks notices the chest open, and more importantly, the item inside missing. He looks up at Luffy with a look of pure fear, and says, Luffy, did you open this chest? Luffy nods that he did, and Shanks gets a knot in his stomach. As he asks his next question, Luffy, did you see the fruit inside of it? Again Luffy nods, and Shanks continues questioning Luffy what happened to the fruit that was in this chest. Luffy looks up guiltily, and says, I was still hungry so I ate it. It tasted sour and bitter though. Shanks quickly grabs the boy by the shoulders and says, panicked, Do you know what you've done, kid? That fruit wasn't just any normal fruit. Luffy looks at him confused and says, What kind of fruit was it? Was it poisoned? Shanks shakes his head no, and says, That fruit was one of the legendary devil fruits from the Grand Line. Luffy, that fruit will grant you great power, but now you'll forever be cursed. The sea will never accept you. Luffy, by eating that fruit you've ensured you'll never be able to learn to swim, because those that eat a devil fruit are unable to swim, and if they fall into the sea they're weakened and die. Luffy looks slightly panicked himself when he remembers Shanks' words from earlier about a great power, and asks, So what power will I get now that I ate that weird fruit, Shanks? Shanks looks at him and says, That was the rumble fruit. It's a Logia type fruit. Meaning you'll be able to create, control, and even become lightning. Luffy's eyes light up at this, and like a typical 7-year-old he says, Cool. I'm a lightning man now. Awesome. I'll definitely be a great marine now. Shanks pounds his fist into the boy's head and says, Luffy, this is serious. When your powers manifest themselves, you'll have to learn to control them. It could take you years. Luffy looks down and says, Sorry Shanks, I'm sorry I opened your chest without permission and ate your fruit. A good marine always asks for permission before going into others' belongings. Seeing the sad look in the boy's eyes, Shanks sighs and says, Don't worry about it, kid. What's done is done, and there's nothing we can do about it now. So let's just forget about it and get back to having fun. He claps his hands, and his entire crew chorus their approval of this idea. Luffy looks at Shanks and smiles, and the bar returns to good spirits. However, their merriment doesn't last long, as a large man with a black goatee, black hair, and an X-shaped scar above his right eye, wearing a long purple coat with a white shirt and black trousers, comes into the bar with an air of superiority, and noticing all the pirates' sneers, as he walks up to the bar and starts talking to Makino, and says, "Hey beautiful, my name is Higume, and me and my men came down from the mountains thirsty. So let me get all the rum you got." Makino blinks at him and says, "I'm sorry, but we're all out. The last bottle of rum was just purchased by the man at the end of the bar." She points to Shanks, and Higume growls and glares at Shanks. Said other man just looks at him and smiles and says, "Hey, it's not a big deal. I've only taken one sip out of the bottle, so if you want you can have it." Higume stalks forward and slaps the outstretched bottle from Shanks' hand and says, "As if I would accept anything that's been touched by some filthy pirate coward. Why don't you and your crew hop back on your ship and sail away like the cowards you are? And if you knew what was good for you, then you would never come back here." After that he turns and storms off. Shanks just looks at the broken bottle and spilled alcohol on the floor and says, "Such a shame, that's a hell of a waste of good rum." Hahaha, well, nothing I can do about it now. As he's laughing, Luffy shoots up angry and says, "Hey Shanks, how could you just let that guy insult you and your crew like that? Why didn't you kick his butt? I know you could have." Shanks looks at the boy and says, "Oh? And what would that have proved?" "I'll tell you what it would have proved, nothing, that's what. Look, all he did was slap some rum out of my hand and insult pirates everywhere. A guy like that isn't worth the trouble of bloodying your fists. No, the best fights are the ones where you don't even have to lift a finger. Remember this, Luffy, you can't solve every problem with your fists. It's a lesson you'll need to learn, especially if you really want to be a marine." Luffy just huffs at this and turns away angry, intending to teach the jerk a lesson for putting down his pals. A few days later the bandits come back into town, and Luffy, still angry at what Higume said to Shanks, decides to confront him in the center of town. However, when he attempts to fight him using his new powers, he fails because of his lack of control, and ends up getting beat up and sat on by Higume himself. "Well boys, we got ourselves quite a catch here. We can sell this devil fruit freak to the highest bidder and be set for life." Hahaha, the other mountain bandits cheer at this. Meanwhile at the bar, Shanks and his crew are once again drinking and having a good time when Mayor Whoop Slap comes running into the bar and says, "Red hairs, you have to come quickly. It's Luffy, he's in trouble." Shanks looks at the old mayor of Fushia village and asks, "What's happened?" The old man looks at him and says, "He went to confront those bandits for insulting you the other day. He tried to fight their leader Higume and got beat up. Now the man is sitting on him and talking about selling him to the slave market because of his devil fruit power. You have to help him." Shanks stands up, pulling his straw hat down to cover his eyes more, and says, "Crew, let's go save our little buddy." He turns and walks out, followed by the members of his crew. When they get to the center of town, the bandits notice them and turn to glare at the pirates. Shanks sees Luffy being sat on by Higume, steps forward, and says, "I suggest you let the kid go, bandit. You see, that kid there is our friend, and we don't take too kindly to those who harm our friends. You have 30 seconds. Higume and the others laugh, and Higume stands and stomps on Luffy and says, "Oh yeah? And what are you coward pirates going to do if I don't let the brat go? He challenged me, and he lost, so I can do whatever I want to him. So why don't you turn tail and get on your ship and sail away before you die?" Shanks looks at him through the shadows of his hat and says, "That was the wrong thing to say. You know, we don't usually like to resort to violence. We prefer to have fun and party, but you're forcing our hand. Don't say I didn't warn you." Higume scoffs and says, "Alright boys, I've had enough of this pirate trash. Kill them all." And, as when the bandits cheer and rush the red-hair pirates, but soon find themselves outclassed, as Yasop the marksman shoots 10 bandits in a matter of 2 seconds, and then Ben Beckman the first mate beats 15 with the butt of his rifle, and Lucky Roo takes out a bunch of bandits with his club. Seeing his men being beaten so easily, Higume takes Luffy and flees. He gets into a little boat and starts rowing out to sea. Soon all the bandits are either dead or knocked out, and Shanks looks around and says, "Where is that guy?" and Luffy. Yasop is the one to answer and says, "Captain, that guy took Luffy and went out to sea." Shanks looks and sees that Yasop is correct. They look to see Higume arguing with Luffy and then throwing him in the ocean, just as the Sea King surfaces behind him. Suddenly Shanks runs and dives off the cliff into the water and begins to swim as fast as he can towards Luffy. Higume, completely oblivious, is smiling and looking at the sputtering child and says, "Serves you right, you brat. Drown for all I care." Hahaha. Suddenly he hears a growl behind him and looks to see the Sea King and does the only thing he can. He soils himself and screams like a girl. A moment later he's silenced as the Sea King swallows him whole, snapping the little boat in half and diving under the water. As this is going on, Luffy is still struggling to stay afloat, but failing miserably. As the Sea King comes back up and spots him, it rushes Luffy, intent on swallowing him as well. But just as he reaches the boy, so does Shanks, who grabs Luffy and dodges the beast, but in the process loses his left arm. As the monster turns to make another pass, Shanks lifts his head up and looks straight at the beast, releasing a wave of haki at it, stopping it in its tracks, and says, "Scram." The beast, thoroughly scared, runs as fast as it can from the scary human. Luffy clings to Shanks crying, and the man rubs his head, and says, "Hey, everything's alright now Luffy, you can stop crying. Marines never cry." Luffy looks up at him, tears still in his eyes, and says, "But Shanks, if it weren't for me you wouldn't have had to fight those bandits, and if I wasn't so weak you wouldn't have had to save me from the Lord of the Coast, and you wouldn't have lost your arm. I'm so weak and helpless. I'll never be a good Marine." Shanks just looks down at the kid clutching his shirt, and says, "Stop being an idiot. I'm glad that you felt strong enough to stand up to that bandit. For me, and the crew, it proves you're a good person. And I don't care about my arm, it's just an arm, what's most important is your life Luffy. Look, if you feel weak then do something about it, train hard, become strong, but never stop being the man you are, because you're a damn good one, and the Marines will be lucky to have you." Luffy looks at him, sniffles and then nods, and breaks into a huge smile, and says, "Thank you Shanks." The red-haired man looks at him, and says, "No problem, now let's get back to shore." After that they swam back to shore, where the red-haired doctor tended to Shanks' injured arm, stemming the bleeding, and things went back to normal until finally the day came when the red-haired pirates had to leave. Luffy once again is his normal self, and has pensive look on his face, as he says, "I guess this is Shanks. Next time I see you I'll be a Marine, and forced to capture you." Shanks laughs, and says, "Yeah, I guess so. Since you're so sure about being a Marine like your grandpa, then I guess there's nothing to be done about it. So my final advice to you is train hard, grow strong, and then set sail on your own one day, as a Marine." Luffy looks at him defiantly, and says, "You know what I will do? I'll become super strong, and one day I'll sail the world, and gather a crew that's stronger than yours. And then I'll become an admiral of the Marines. You'll see." Shanks sees the conviction in the boy's eyes, and so he takes his straw hat from his head, and places it down over Luffy's head, and says, "Alright then I'll hold you to that Luffy, and in order to see that you follow through I'm giving you my hat. It's my most treasured possession, and was given to me by my former captain. Take good care of it because when you become a powerful Marine I'm going to come and get it back." Luffy looks at him shocked, but then quickly says, "I'll take great care of it. I'll keep it with me always. And when I become an admiral of the Marines I'll give it back to you after I capture you. It's a promise." Shanks laughs, and Ben from the ship says, "Captain, we're ready to go." Shanks nods at his first mate, and walks up the ramp waving at the entire village. "Bye everyone. Thanks for the great food, and great times. Be safe." And after saying that the plank raises up, and the red-haired pirates sail out, never to be seen by Fushia village again. Whoop Slap turns to Makino, and says, "They weren't so bad for pirates, they were actually nice guys." Makino nods, and says, "Yeah they were, I think the entire town is going to miss them, but none more so than Luffy." And, as everyone starts to leave, and go back to their lives, Luffy continues to stare out into the horizon, thinking I will become an admiral, that's a promise Shanks. Time skip. 10 years later. It's now been 10 years since the events that took place with the red-hair pirates. 10 years since Luffy ate the rumble-rumble fruit, and in that 10 years Luffy has trained hard to master his powers, as well as all the knowledge pounded into his head by his grandfather during his training with him at Marineford, and has become a strong young man. He's changed a lot since then, has grown taller, his body is covered in lithe muscles from all his training, but the biggest change is the fact that he wears blue jeans, Marine issue combat boots, with a closed short-sleeve red vest on his upper body, and over that he wears the white Marine coat with the word justice in kanji on the back, like a cape. Today finds Luffy standing at the docks of Fushia village preparing to leave. The entire village is there to see him off, and at the front are Mayor Whoop Slap and Makino. The old mayor steps forward and says, "Are you sure about this, Luffy? You know you can stay around and continue to protect the village with your powers." Luffy looks at the old man and says, "Why would I want to do that, Mayor? All the crime in Fushia has stopped. The bandits and other criminals are afraid to come into the village because they know they'll suffer justice. Besides, I made a promise to Shanks that I was going to become an admiral of the Marines, and I will. How am I going to become admiral of Marines if I stick around here?" Makino smiles at him and says, "Well then you be careful out there, Luffy. The sea can be a dangerous place, especially for someone in a small ship like you." Luffy just smiles his usual big goofy smile, and says, "Don't worry about me, Makino-Nisan. I have my training as a Marine to get me through, and if worst comes to worst, I always have my devil fruit powers. Well, I should get going, gotta go start looking for my crew." And so he climbs into his little ship, which is a small cabin for him to sleep in or store provisions, unties it from the dock, and puts up his sail with the Marine symbol on it, and says, "Bye Makino-Nisan. Bye Mayor. Bye everyone. Stay well. And I'll see you all again when I'm an admiral of the Marines." And with that he begins to sail away with the mayor, and Makino waving sadly at him, as everyone else just cheers for their hometown hero. As Luffy is sailing away, he's leaning back, with his hat over his eyes just enjoying the rocking of the waves. Once he's about 4 miles out from Dawn Island the water ripples, and gets violent. Luffy, feeling it, looks over the left side of the little ship to see what's going on. Behind him the Lord of the Coast, who tried to eat him 10 years ago, rises up from the sea. As soon as Luffy feels its hot breath hit his back, he turns around and stares at the giant Sea King and says, "Oh, it's you. Did you come to play?" Sorry, but I can't play with you today. Over the last year, while protecting the town with his powers, Luffy has fought with the Lord of the Coast multiple times, and always won. Now the beast believes he has Luffy right where he wants him, as it rears back getting prepared to attack, and swallow the 17-year-old whole. Luffy gets into stance, cocks his fist back, just as the beast lunges forward. Luffy throws his fist towards it, and says knockout blow. He unleashes a bone-shattering blow at the Lord of the Coast, which hits the beast right between the eyes, and shatters the bones in its head. When the shock wave from the punch passes, all that's left is a floating, bleeding carcass. Luffy smiles wide, and says, well, I found my dinner for the next few days. And so using his lightning he cuts the Sea King up into many big pieces of meat, and brings them aboard his little ship, leaving what he can't take for the other sea animals, and birds, and opens his sail, and gets back on his journey. A few days later, Luffy is still out to sea, and is feeling hungry because he's eaten all the Sea King meat he took already. Oh man, I feel like I'm gonna die if I don't get something in my stomach soon. As if to emphasize this, his stomach releases a large growl. Eventually he spots a barrel floating in the sea. He steers his boat towards the barrel, and once close enough he drags it towards himself, and pulls it into the boat, smiling, as he opens the top, and looks inside to find a ton of apples. This excites him. Finally some food. It's not meat, but it'll do, and after all Gramps always said that a balanced diet makes for a balanced and strong body. And so he begins to chow down on the apples within. Eventually once he's getting to the bottom of the barrel, he climbs inside to finish the last of them. Once he does he stretches, and yawns, and decides that it's time for a nap. So he climbs out of the barrel, places the top back on it to use for later storage, and heads inside the cabin, and falls asleep unaware of what he's going to encounter when he wakes up. A while later Luffy wakes to the sound of voices outside of his cabin. I say we open it, and see what's inside before the captain gets her grubby hands on it first. Says the first voice. Yeah, who's gonna tell her we were in it anyway? Certainly not Kobe, right Kobe? Says the second voice. Then Luffy hears a third voice that sounds young and scared. And no, I won't tell, I promise. A fourth voice then speaks up and says, see, so let's open it up and find out just what's inside. At that point Luffy decides it's time to get up and see what's happening. So, as 3 of the 4 people go to open the barrel he found the apples in, he walks out of the cabin, and stretches. Man, that was a good nap. When he looks around the small boat he notices 3 pirates, and a young man wearing glasses with pink hair looking at him in shock. He looks at all of them, and says, hey, my name is Lieutenant Monkey D. Luffy of the Marines. What are you doing on my ship? The young man decides to respond. My name is Kobe, and we were just, but he quickly realizes what a bad situation they're in, and panics. These guys are pirates who kidnapped me, and we're going to steal this ship, and everything in it. Luffy looks at him confused, and says, okay, I just woke up from a nap, so give me a second. Those 3 are pirates, and you were kidnapped by them, then brought aboard my ship so that they could steal it, and all the food, and possible money on board. Did I get all that right? Kobe nods his head, and says, yeah, that's about everything. Oh, and they belong to the Alvida pirates. And that's Alvida's ship. As he points to the bigger ship which Luffy now notices his little ship is tied to. Luffy puts his hand to his chin for a moment thinking, and says, Alvida. Ah. She's the only really well-known female pirate in the East Blue, right? If I recall, her wanted poster was ugly, and she's worth 10 million bulleyes. Shishi. Kobe gawks at this, and is about to speak when one of the pirates speak up, and says, hey, watch what you say about our captain. Why are we just standing here listening to these 2 kids talk? So what if he's a marine? He's only one stupid kid. Let's take him out. His fellows agree with a combined yeah. And they attempt to attack the black-haired boy, however he sighs, and says, I hate dealing with small fries. Weaklings should learn their place. As he vanishes before all 3 men find different parts of their bodies caved in. One gets his stomach caved in, and hears the breaking of his ribs. The second gets his face caved, and feels the breaking of his jaw. And the last gets his chest caved in, and can hear, and feel the breaking of his chest bones. And then they all go flying off the smaller boat in different directions. The second and third men go crashing into the sea several thousand feet away from the 2 ships, while the third man, and the leader of the group, goes crashing through the side of Alvida's ship straight into the cargo hold. Kobe gapes at this, and says, are you insane? Luffy looks at him, and says, hey kid, you got any food? I'm starving. Kobe looks at him surprised, and says, you really are crazy, thinking about food when you just damaged the ship of a horrible woman like Alvida. Suddenly the sky above them darkens, and Kobe hears, who's ugly Kobe? Kobe, shaking in fear, looks up, and sees the angry face of Alvida. Alvida is a fat woman, with short legs, wearing what looks like a cowboy outfit with a red feather coming from her hat, and a big iron mac, the reason for her name, resting on her shoulders. Luffy being the person he is says, hey kid, would that be the fat lady? Kobe pales at this, and Alvida's face turns red in rage, and she shouts, fat who's fat? Luffy blinks, and says, you are. Haven't you ever looked in a mirror before, pirate? Alvida roars in rage, and says, boys. Kill this little punk. Kobe, fearing for his life, attempts to hide inside of the small ship's cabin, as a bunch of Alvida's men step forward with their pistols and rifles, and aim at Luffy, who doesn't look the least bit scared, and Alvida says, "Any last words, you disrespectful brat?" Before the kid disappears, however, Harry appears on the deck of the pirate ship behind all the crew, and its captain Luffy says, "Last words? I guess I should tell you that won't work, you're just gonna waste bullets." Alvida's crew turns slightly surprised by the boy's speed, but still laugh at his words, and Alvida says, "Looks like he's too frightened to say anything intelligent. Boys do it, boys fire." And so the men fire at Luffy, however they're shocked when the bullets pass right through him, and he's left standing there unharmed. Luffy looks up smiling, puts the index fingers of both his hands up, and points them at the man with the guns, lights his fingertips up in electricity, and says, "Lightning bullets," and fires off bullets of lightning right at the guns in their hands, destroying them, and making the men drop them. The men continue to look on in shock, as does Alvida, but she's undeterred, and says, "Alright then, if bullets don't work, let's try sharp weapons. Get over there, and kill him." The men look uncertain. "Well, what are you waiting for? Get over there, and kill that little brat before I kill you." With that threat, they all take out swords and knives, and rush forward, jumping towards Luffy, who sighs, as he takes a special stance before saying quietly, "Shave," and then he vanishes again, and suddenly all of Alvida's crew are sent flying in varying directions, most unconscious, and with blood and or spit running down their mouths, and after all of them have landed, Luffy reappears. Kobe, who's been watching, comes out of hiding with a look of awe on his face, and says, "How did you do that? You just beat all of the crew in an instant." Luffy smiles, and says, "I'm a Marine, and I was trained by 2 great Marines, and learned many things from them." Kobe looks shocked while Alvida looks slightly frightened, and also annoyed, because she knows of the strength of some Marines, and knows that the technique he used is a move that only high-ranking Marines know, but she just has to be stupid, and says, "How did a scrawny, stupid little brat like you get into the Marines?" Luffy, looking at her, says, "I don't have to tell you anything. Iron Mace Alvida, as of this moment you are under arrest for the crime of piracy, and for kidnapping this kid. It's time you learn your lesson. Lieutenant Monkey D. Luffy will gladly give it to you." And in an instant Luffy closes the distance between them, and punches her right in the face. While his fist is slightly encased in hockey, she goes flying head over heels, and crashes right through the wall to her quarters. Kobe looks to him in admiration and awe, and says, thank you. You just saved my life from that woman. For the last year I've been forced to be her cabin boy." Luffy looks at him, and says, "Hey Kobe, what's your dream?" Kobe looks at him a little taken aback, but responds nonetheless, "My dream is to be a strong Marine, kind of like you are now, and to one day become an admiral." Luffy smiles at this, and says, "Well then go for your dream now that you're free. I'll even help you because it's also my dream to be an admiral of the Marines, and I'm going to fulfill that dream." Kobe looks at him, and says, "Luffy, if we both become admirals then we'll be comrades." Luffy says, "I know. I look forward to the day when we can work alongside each other after achieving our dreams." Kobe starts crying at this, and says, "Thank you Luffy." He wipes his eyes, and says, "Let's get out of here. We can take some of the stolen goods on this ship, and transfer them to your boat, and then set sail to the nearest island." Luffy nods at this, and so the two take a bunch of food, and confiscate the pirates' ill-gotten treasure, and set off back out to sea. However, before getting too far away Luffy takes out a transponder snail, and rings the line. When someone picks up he says, "This is Lieutenant Monkey D. Luffy calling to report that I have captured the pirate Alvida, and her crew. I will give you the coordinates of her ship. Please send out a platoon to pick them up." He gives the coordinates, and a voice on the other end says, "Good work Lieutenant Luffy, thanks to your efforts that's one less pirate in East Blue. A ship has been dispatched, and will pick up Alvida and her crew in a few hours. Her bounty will be sent to you at a later date." The straw hat wearing boy smiles, and says, "Thank you, Monkey D. Luffy out," and hangs up the line. After that they early set sail to the next island, both wondering what the future will hold for them, and Luffy hoping that at the next island, he can find the first member of his crew. He thinks to himself, "I really hope I can find my first crewmate at the next island. And if there's another fight, I really hope my next opponent isn't as weak as that Alvida woman was. Oh well, no matter what happens I look forward to the next adventure, and hopefully some good meat. Shishi." It's been about a week since Luffy left Fushia village, Fort Alvida, and set sail with Kobe. In that week he and Kobe had become great friends. They told each other their histories, where Kobe found out that Luffy has his rumble powers, and how he got them, and Luffy found out Kobe came from a small fishing village, and was abducted by Alvida, and forced to become her cabin boy a little over a year ago. It's thanks to this little fact that Luffy and Kobe haven't exhausted their meat store, as every other day Kobe would fish, and the ones he would catch Luffy would fry with his powers. However, today we find the two getting close to the coast of an island with a small village called Shell's Town. Luffy is leaning back with his hat over his eyes, and Kobe is steering the little boat therein. As he notices the island he says, "Boy Luffy, wake up, we're coming up on an island." Luffy's eyes snap open at this, and he says, "Really? Well that's good, it'll give us an opportunity to buy some more provisions." As he looks in the direction of the island with concentration, Kobe sweat drops at this, and says, "Are you ever not hungry? I mean, your appetite is the reason that we only have a quarter of our provisions left." Luffy says, "I can't help that, I was born with an abnormally large hunger. In fact, according to my gramps, it runs in the family." He smiles his goofy smile at Kobe, then says, "Well, let's hurry to that port town, I can see a marine base there. It'll be the perfect place for you to start your career as a marine." With that, he grabs hold of the end of the boat with one hand, lifts the other up, pointing it behind the boat, and fires out a burst of lightning, causing the little boat to rocket forward, and Kobe to scream in fright. As they get real close, Luffy cuts off the electricity, and sits back down laughing, as he says, "Man, you should have seen your face." "Shishi," said boy balks at him, and says, "Why are you laughing? I almost had a heart attack. Next time warn me if you're going to do something like that." Luffy continues to laugh. "Shishi, lighten up, Kobe, you're too jumpy. If a simple thing like a little speed jump frightens you, then you'll never survive basic training. The life of a marine is fraught with danger and surprises, and you have to learn to deal with each one as they come, and show no fear." Kobe nods his head at the older boy, and proceeds to steer the little boat next to the docks of Shell's town. The two proceed to step out of the boat, as Kobe ties it to the dock to keep it from floating away, and then they walk into town. They see that it looks pretty quiet, as there are few people out on the streets. They head towards the local pub, and walk in. They're greeted by a pretty woman and a little girl. "Hello. Welcome to my cafe, I'm Rirka, how can I help you boys today?" Her sentence dies off, as she notices Luffy's clothes. However, Luffy just smiles, and says, "Yes, we'd like to get food, and some drinks. We've sailed here from Fushia village, and it's been a long journey, so we're really hungry." Rirka looks shocked, and slightly relieved at this, and says, "If you've come far, Fushia village is all the way on Dawn Island. Sit down, and I'll get you both some food and juice." She smiles at them, and walks back into the kitchen, as Luffy and Kobe take a seat at one of the tables. The little girl comes up to them, and says, "Hello. My name is Rika. What's your name, misters?" Luffy smiles at the little girl, and says, "I'm Lieutenant Monkey D. Luffy of the Marines. And this is my friend." He motions to Kobe, who bows a little, and says, "My name is Kobe, nice to meet you, little miss." Rika smiles at them, and says, "What do you guys do? Are you a couple of sea explorers? Or pirate hunters like Zoro Nyson?" Kobe looks at her, and says, "Pirate hunter? Zoro. Wait, you don't mean Roronoa Zoro, do you?" Rika nods at this, and says, "Yeah, Zoro Nyson is really nice." Kobe balks at this, and says, "Nice? I wouldn't exactly call a guy like Zoro nice, I mean he hunts pirates and bandits for a living." Luffy cocks his head at this, and says, "Hey, who's this Zoro guy, Kobe?" The pink-haired boy looks at Luffy like he's stupid, but then remembers he spent years training at Marine headquarters, and then spent the last year back in his hometown, so it's not a long shot that he doesn't know about Zoro. Kobe clears his throat, as Rirka comes out, and sets 2 glasses of juice in front of him, and says, "Pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro. He's an infamous bounty hunter. The reason is because most of the bounties he hunts are all pirates. The guy is said to be a demon. I remember Alvida and all her crew being scared to even hear his name. He's supposed to be extremely strong and violent." Luffy looks like he's thinking about something for a moment, and then smiles, and says, "Alright, if he's strong then I'll have him join my crew, as a marine." Kobe chokes at this, and coughs a few times before saying, "Are you insane? The guy hunts pirates for a living. And tries to avoid marines except when collecting bounties. Do you really think he'd join one? Besides, how are you even going to find him? He's probably somewhere across the sea right now." Rirka comes up, and sets a bunch of food on their table, meats, and vegetables, rice, and just heaps of food. She looks at them, and says, "Who are you boys talking about?" Kobe thanks her for the food, and says, "Pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro." Luffy hears an up and coming marine, and wants to ask that guy to become a member of his crew, but I pointed out to him that he's probably long gone by now. Rirka pales at this, and says, "Don't say the word marine around here, this village is home to a marine base, and, as for Zoro, he's still here." Luffy swallows a huge mouthful of meat at this, and says, "Really? Where's he at? I want to ask him to join my crew." Rirka looks sad at this, and says, "He's in the yard of the marine base here, tied up and under arrest." Kobe takes a sip of his juice, and says, "What did he do to get arrested by the marines?" Rirka speaks up, and says, "Nothing. Zoro Nai was just protecting me from Helm's stupid wolf." Rirka looks at the 2 young men to explain, and says, "Elpo is the son of the commander in charge of the base here, Captain Morgan. He's a spoiled brat, and walks around the town like he owns it. He used to make his wolf attack people, and anyone who spoke out against him he told his father about, and they were punished. About a month ago Zoro-san came to town. He stumbled into the cafe here, hungry and tired, so Rirka and I gave him some food and rum. He seemed like a pleasant enough man. But then Helpo came in with his wolf, and the marine guards his father had assigned to him at all times, demanding that he and his mud be served. Rika sometimes helps me to serve the customers. Well, that day was one of those days, and, as she was taking the little tray of drinks over to Helm's table, she tripped and spilled it all over the wolf. Luffy and Kobe both listened to this with rapt attention, and in Luffy's case slight anger, while Rika takes a drink of some water offered by her daughter, and then continues. Well, Helpo didn't think it was an accident, and so he ordered the wolf to attack my little girl. She was frightened, however, as the wolf went to lunge at her. Zoro-san reacted. He killed the wolf in an instant, saving Rika's life. However, Helpo didn't react too well to it, and started to make demands of Zoro-san, and so Zoro-san made a deal with Help. The deal was that if Zoro-san could survive for a month without food or water, the Help would release him, and leave me and my daughter in peace, as he had threatened to burn down the cafe, which is also our home. Kobe is shocked that the son of a marine hero like Captain Morgan could be such a jerk, while Luffy is silently seething in rage, as from what he hears a marine is using his position to subjugate the townspeople, and that's not what a marine is supposed to do. Marines are supposed to protect the innocent. So he resolves to help Shell's town get out from under Morgan's grip, and reveal his corruption to Marine HQ. Just then a tall, ugly, blonde-haired boy in a purple suit kicks the door to the cafe in, and walks in with 3 marines flanking him, and says, "Pat's still in business, I see. Well, that's a shame, isn't it, boys?" The 3 marines with him, even though they secretly hate the little brat, all nod yes at his question. The purple-suited boy sits at a table with his feet up on it, and leaning back in his chair, as Ririka brings him a glass of juice. He looks around, and says to his guards loud enough for Ririka and her daughter to hear him, "How long has that pirate hunter been out there now?" One guard speaks up and says, 3 weeks, Help, sir." Helpo nods at this, and says, Right, you know, I can't believe that he still thinks that after the month is up I'm going to free him, and leave this place here be." Rika gasps at this, and says, "But you promise. You said if Zoro and I survived a month without food or water you'd let him go, and leave us in peace." Helpo laughs at this, and says, "I lied. I'm going to kill him tomorrow, and then I'm going to come here right after, and burn this place to the ground." Ha 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 ha. Luffy, watching this from his table, begins to release electricity from his body, just barely holding his body solid. Kobe, noticing the increasing temperature and slight crackling, looks at Luffy and says, "Luffy, calms down. You can't do anything to him, or else it'll cause more trouble for Ririka and Rika. Just stay calm. We'll call the main marine base and inform them what's going on around here." Luffy ignores Kobe and stands up, hat shadowing his eyes, and walks over to Helm's table. Helpo looks up to find the slightly taller Luffy standing in front of him, and not taking notice of his marine jacket says, "Is there something you want, filth? Well, speak up." Suddenly Help finds a fist buried into his left cheek, sending him flying into the wall of the cafe, as Luffy looks up with a glare, and says, "You're nothing but a whiny little brat. And your father is no longer a marine. He's nothing but a corrupt bully. And I promise that before I'm done here I will beat him down, free this town of his oppression, and reveal his corruption to Marine Command." He then turns and walks out, and Kobe follows him. As they're walking rather fast they don't notice that they're being followed by Rika. Kobe says, "Luffy, where are we going?" Luffy, without turning around or stopping, replies, "We're going to the base, and I'm gonna get Zoro to join my crew by telling him what that blonde idiot has planned, and free him." Kobe's eyes widen at this, as he says, "You can't do that, Luffy. It's a marine base, and even though you're a marine you're not authorized personnel. Plus, what makes you think a guy who is being held by marines for no reason would join one?" Luffy smiles at this, and says, "Because he'll be helped by a real marine, and since he's a nice guy with honor, then he'll be honor-bound to join me." Shishishishi. Kobe shakes his head at this. As they reach the wall outside the base, Luffy grabs Kobe by the shirt, tenses his legs, and jumps the both of them up to the top of the wall. When they get there they look into the yard to see a man wearing a white shirt, green bandana around his head, dark green colored pants, combat boots, and a light green sash tied to a post. As they look at him suddenly they see a ladder appear next to them, and see Rika climb up it. She motions to them to be quiet, as she goes over the wall, and runs up to Zoro. The man notices her, and says, "That lost kid." She looks up at him, and says, Zoro Nison, I brought you some rice balls. I made them myself, and I worked really hard on them." She uncovers the 2 rice balls, and lifts them up towards Zoro, who says, "Didn't you hear me, kid? I said get lost." Rika flinches at his tone, as Helpo, still injured from Luffy's earlier punch, and his guards walk in. The boy chuckles, and says, "Now Zoro, scaring little children, you truly are a monster, aren't you? As for you, little girl, do you know what the punishment for helping a criminal is? It's death." Rika pales at this, as Helpo bends down, and takes one of the rice balls, and says, "Ooh, a rice ball, maybe I'll overlook this." He bites into it, and immediately spits it out, and says, "You idiot. You used sugar. Rice balls are supposed to have salt, you moron." He takes the second rice ball, as Rika says, "I thought they taste sweeter with sugar." Help throws the rice balls on the ground, and stomps on them, and says, "HMPH guard, toss this girl out of the yard now." The marine turns to him, and says, "But sir, she's just a child." Helpo looks at him and says, "Do you want me to tell my father about your insubordination? If not, then do as I say and toss her out now." The Marine steps forward and whispers to the girl, "Sorry about this, just tuck yourself into a ball to absorb the impact." He lifts her up and tosses her. Luffy reacts quickly and catches her with ease and sets her on the ground outside the base as he hears Zoro say, "Remember our ideal idiot, if I survive a few more days you have to leave the kid and her mom alone." Helpo says, "I remember the deal. Just make sure you survive long enough." And with that he walks off. A moment later Luffy appears over the wall and walks up to Zoro. The older male looks at him and says, "Who are you? And what the hell do you want?" Luffy looks at him seriously and says, "My name is Lieutenant Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm gonna become an admiral of the Marines. I want you to join my crew." Bounty Hunter Arano Zoro. Zoro looks at him like he's crazy and says, "You stupid, get lost, I'm not going to join your stupid crew." Luffy frowns at this and says, "You know that Brad isn't going to keep his promise, right? He already said he's going to kill you tomorrow." Zoro chuckles at this and says, "I kinda figured he'd do something like that, but it doesn't matter, just leave. But before you go, could you pick up that rice ball there and put it in my mouth?" Luffy looks down at the rice ball, which is flat as a pancake and covered in dirt, and picks it up and says, "This one?" Zoro nods, and Luffy holds it to his mouth and watches as he devours the whole thing. The swordsman then says, "Tell the kid it was great and I said thanks." Luffy smiles at this and says, "Will do, but I'm not giving up on you becoming a member of my crew, so I'll be back real soon." Zoro snorts at this as Luffy vanishes into nothing and is gone, leaving Zoro to wonder just who the hell is that guy and how did he do that. Maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to take him up on his offer. After all, I can't complete my dream of being the strongest swordsman in the world if I'm dead, and if joining with the Marines can help my dream, then it would be worth it to be called a dog of the government. I guess there's no choice but to wait and see how this all plays out. Back in Rerika's pub, Luffy, Kobe, and Rika are all sitting at the bar, and the little girl is smiling a dazzling smile and saying, "He really said it was good." "Really?" Luffy smiles at her and says, "Yeah, he said they were great, and he said to tell you thanks." Rika smiles even more at this and says, "That's good, I thought he wouldn't like them. I really put my all into making those rice balls for Zoro and I." Rika, wiping down the bar, decides to voice her concerns. "Luffy-san, if Helpo intends to execute Zoro-san tomorrow, how exactly do you intend to save him?" Luffy takes on a contemplative look for a moment and then says, "I'm going to offer him his freedom in exchange for his agreeing to join my crew and the Marines. I'll also offer to retrieve his sword for him if he agrees. Because my crew will need a strong swordsman." Kobe balks at this and says, "Hey, are you stupid, Luffy? He already said no once, so what makes you think he'll agree if you ask him a second time?" Luffy cocks his head to the side and says, "Well, everyone makes a mistake once. I'm sure he'll join me if I ask again, because, as the saying goes, second time's the charm. Shishi." After saying this he stands up and stretches and says, "Alright, well, it's time for me to go talk to Zoro again. Well, I'm gone, Kobe, it's up to you to keep Rika-chan and her mom safe." Kobe goes green at this and says, "And me? Luffy, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm not a strong guy, and I don't have powers or training like you do. I think leaving me, as their protector, is sentencing them to death." The older boy looks at him and says, "Kobe, didn't you say your dream was to be an admiral someday? How will you ever achieve that dream if you have no confidence in yourself? I have faith that you can survive anything that blonde brat can throw at you. After all, you survived an evil pirate like Alvida for a year." These words fill Kobe with confidence and determination as he says, "You're right, Luffy, I did survive Alvida, so anything else would be a cakewalk. Alright, I'll protect Rika-san and Rika-chan with my life." Luffy smiles at this and says, "Now that's the spirit. See you in a while." And with that he walks out, heading to the Navy base. 5 minutes later he's back in the yard of the base, standing in front of Zoro again. The swordsman looks up at him and says, "So you're back again, huh?" Luffy nods and says, "Yeah, I figured you had enough time to mull over my offer, so what do you say, will you become my comrade? Or would you prefer to die?" Zoro scowls at this and says, "Of course I don't want to die. Who would want to die a pitiful death like the one that jackass has in mind? Besides, I can't die not before I fulfill my dream to be the greatest swordsman in the world." Luffy smiles at this and says, "And that's why I want you for my crew. After all, an admiral of the Marines deserves the best swordsman in the world. So what do you say? Join my crew and become a Marine." The older male chuckles at this and says, "Fine, go get my katana and free me, and I'll become your comrade." Luffy whoops at this and says, "Alright. So where's your katana?" Zoro motions with his head to the base and says, "Inside there, the blonde moron took them from me when I agreed to his deal. Get him back to me, and I'll be able to cut these ropes without a problem." Luffy nods at this and says, "Alright, I'll be right back with the katana." And with that he uses shave to enter the base itself. As Luffy is running around checking each room, most of the Marines are on the roof of the base, attempting to raise a giant statue of their commanding officer Axe-Hand Morgan, who is screaming at them for having problems. "Come on, you worthless sacks of shit. Put your backs into it." This monument will let everyone in that worthless town know who to thank for their continued safety and existence. Ha 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 ha. Just then one of the Marines loses his grip, causing the others to do so as well, and makes the half-raised statue come crashing down on the roof and splitting in half from the force. Morgan, seeing this, becomes enraged and cuts down the Marine next to him with his axe hand, then turns on the others and says, "You fools. You dare to destroy my statue, I'll kill you." Before he can act, Help comes out to the roof all beat up and says, "Daddy, help me please. This ruffian just broke into the base, beat me up, and stole Zoro's swords. I want you to kill him. Not even you have ever hit me." He grabs his father's pants and looks up to him with tears streaming down his cheeks. Morgan looks down at him and raises his good hand and whack. He backhands Help, who looks surprised as he says, "The reason I never hit you before is because you are a useless waste of space. However you shame the Morgan name. To allow a common street urchin to get past you is pathetic. Sigh, looks like I'll have to clean up your mess again." All men to the courtyard on the double. The Marines all mobilize and begin to rush back into the base and towards the courtyard with Morgan and Help right behind them. Back in the courtyard, Luffy runs up to Zoro and says, "Alright, I'm back. I didn't know which sword was yours, so I grabbed them all." The swordsman looks at him and says, "They're all mine. I use 3-sword style. Now if you put one in my mouth I can cut these ropes." The younger male looks at him and says, "Oh? Well, that's pretty cool." And, as he's getting ready to put one sword held between Zoro's teeth, he hears rifles cocked behind him and hears a deep voice say, "That's far enough, kid. Put the swords down and step away from the pirate hunter or be killed where you stand now." Luffy turns slightly to see the man who spoke, only to see a hulk of a man with blonde hair and an axe for one hand, with a metal jaw and a captain's coat on over his black shirt with grey pants and black boots. Luffy slips the sword into Zoro's mouth, then turns to the hulking man and his subordinates and says, "Are you Captain Morgan?" Morgan laughs at this and says, "Yes, I am. I'm Captain Axe Hand Morgan. And who might you be? You're obviously a Marine by the coat. But I don't recognize you. What's your name and rank?" The straw hat wearing boy nods at this and says, "Then that means you're the corrupt Marine who uses his power to control the good people of Shellstown. I'm hereby placing you under arrest in the name of justice and Marine headquarters. My name is Lieutenant Monkey D. Luffy." The large man laughs at this and says, "That's rich. Like a low-rank officer like you could ever beat a captain like me. You know what, I was going to let you go with a small beating, but just for that I think I'll kill you and that swordsman both right now. Boys, take aim." The Marines holding rifles hold up their guns and take aim at Luffy. Suddenly everyone hears a ripping sound and turns to see that Zoro is free of his bonds. The swordsman takes all his katana and puts them back in his belt and draws out the remaining 2 blades, holding one in each hand, and walks up next to Luffy and says, "Thanks for the assist. I forgot your name." Luffy looks at him and says, "You're welcome, remember our deal?" He nods and says, "Ah, since you helped me I'll join your crew." Morgan, having enough of watching them go back and forth, screams out, "Well, what are you waiting for? Fire. Kill them both." The Marines, being scared, follow the order and start firing on the 2 young men. However, they're all surprised when Zoro just slashes their bullets in half before they reach him. However, they get frightened when they see all the bullets Zoro isn't cutting are just passing right by Luffy, as if he's not there. Morgan, not caring in the slightest, says if the guns don't work, then stab them to death. The Marines take out their swords and rush the 2 young men. However, Zoro intercepts them all with his 3 blades and says, "Hey Lieutenant, you don't mind if I take all these small fries, do you?" Luffy shakes his head and replies, "Nope, I'll handle Captain Morgan myself." As he walks towards Morgan, cracking his knuckles, said man stares at the boy like he's stupid and says, "You'll handle me? What does a nobody lieutenant like you think you can do against a Marine legend like me? I'll cleave you in 2. He raises his axe hand high in the air, and just when Luffy is within reach, brings it down on the straw hat wearing boy, attempting to cleave him in 2 from the head down. However, Luffy simply catches the blade of the axe between 2 of his fingers, then holds it there over his head. Morgan begins to sweat at the fact that this teenager just stopped his attack like it was nothing, and starts trying to pull away. However, he finds that the boy's grip is stronger than he thought. "Well said." Boy simply says, "Is it the best you've got, Captain?" Everyone, even Morgan, is surprised and scared of this, and Morgan says, "WW, who are you?" Luffy looks at him seriously and says, "I'm Monkey D. Luffy, and I'm the man who will be an admiral of the Marines. But to you I'm the man who's about to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." As he cocks his free hand back open palmed, encases it in a thin layer of hockey, and then hits Morgan in the stomach with his palm. The man attempts to dodge the blow, as best he can in his position, but still takes the full impact to his right side ribs. The hulking man falls to his knees, barely conscious, blood and spit dribbling from his chin, as the teen releases his axe, and he looks on in fear. As the lieutenant steps closer to him, he says, "What are you? Where did you get this strength? How could a squirt like you beat a strong man like me?" Luffy cocks his hand back, as it becomes engulfed in his fruit's power, further scaring the disgraced Marine, and says, "Your reign of terror is over. Lightning Fist." He brings his electrified fist forward and hits Morgan in the face, sending the man flying, already unconscious, sure burned away, and second-degree electrical burns littering his face. Seeing their evil commanding officer defeated causes the rest of the Marines to stop fighting, but what they do next shocks Luffy and Zoro, because they start to cheer Morgan's defeat. Zoro and Luffy, not knowing what to do, decide to just leave the Marines to their devices, and so with that in mind they slip away in the confusion and head to Ryuka's pub. When they arrive, the little girl and her mother are happy to see Zoro alive, and well, Ryuka offers to make a big meal for everyone, and all agree. Over dinner, Zoro and Luffy tell the others all about the fight with the Marines, and Morgan, the woman, and her daughter are in awe of the power the Straw Hat Marine possess. However, the merriment is soon brought to an end by the arrival of the base Marines. As Zoro and Luffy are preparing for another fight, a man wearing the standard Navy outfit, but wearing a green ascot, walks in, and standing at attention says, "My name is Commander Ripper. And on behalf of myself and all my fellow Marines, I would like to thank Hirano Zoro and Lieutenant Luffy for defeating Morgan and releasing us from his tyranny. Thank you very much." The other Marines chorus the same sentiment. Zoro sits back down and turns back to his rum, while Luffy returns to his meat. Ripper clears his throat and says, "With that being said, I have contacted the main HQ about what has transpired here, and they have assured me that they'll be sending out a high-ranked officer to pick up ex-Captain Morgan. Also, they ordered me to inform Lieutenant Luffy that effective immediately you are hereby promoted to the rank of Commander. Also, Hirano Zoro, you've been accepted into the Marines and are given the rank of Chief Petty Officer." Ryuka and Rika both beam at this, and Luffy smirks at this and says, "Thank you for this information, Commander Ripper. Please do me a favor and be a better leader than Morgan. Also, I'd like to ask a favor." Ripper looks at him and says, "What do you require from Luffy-san?" Luffy points to Kobe and says, "Take that guy in and train him to be a Marine." The commander looks at the pink-haired boy and says, "Are you a pirate?" Kobe stutters out, "No, sir." Ripper nods at this and says, "Very well, we will take the lad in and train him up into a fine Marine." Luffy nods at this and turns to Ryuka and says, "Say, do you think we could take some of this food here with us?" The woman smiles and says, "Of course, Luffy-san. I'll pack a bag full." And with that she bustles off. 20 minutes later finds Zoro and Luffy at the docks, preparing to get into their little boat and set off, with the swordsman grumbling about the size of the boat, and Luffy assuring him that, as their crew expands, they'll get a bigger ship. As soon as they're on board and partially out to sea, they hear someone screaming their names and turn to see Rika and her mother, along with the rest of Shell's town, waving at them and yelling their goodbyes. Then they see the Marines and hear Ripper says, "All salute." As every Marine, including the newly inducted Kobe, salutes them, though the pink-haired boy is the only one with tears in the corners of his eyes. Eventually the island becomes nothing but a speck, and Zoro decides to voice a question he's been keeping for a while now, and says, "So Commander, where are we heading to next?" Luffy cocks his head to the side and says, "No clue." This causes Zoro to face fault, as he says, "What the hell? I thought the commander was always supposed to have a destination in mind." The boy laughs at this and says, "That's what a navigator is for, and since we don't have one, until we do, we go where the wind takes us. I think it makes things more interesting that way, shishi." And with that, both young men settle down into the boat and wonder what the wind will have in store for them next. Time skip. 2 days later. It has been 2 days since Luffy and his new crewmate Hirano Zoro defeated rogue Marine Captain Morgan and freed Shell's town. 2 days since they sailed away from Shell's town, and in that time they haven't come across not even one other ship, pirate, Marine, or otherwise. At this point they've run out of the food packed by Ryuka, and it's only through sheer luck and Luffy's powers that they've managed to keep themselves fed on fish and the occasional sea king. Today finds the 2 young men just sailing round board when the swordsman speaks up. "Why, Luffy, where the hell are heading?" The straw hat wearing Marine blinks and says, "I don't know. I've just been steering the ship by the wind." The swordsman balks at this and says, "Seriously? You're the commander, shouldn't you know where we're going?" Luffy looks at him and says, "Nope, I have no idea how to navigate, looks like we're lost, shishi." Zoro deadpans at this and says, "You're an idiot." Just then both of their stomachs growl and they hear a squawk above them. Looking up they see a bird, and Luffy says, "Well, I guess we should eat. I'll just fire off some lightning bolts and bring that bird down here, and then we can cook it." The older male just shakes his head as the Logia user stands up in the boat preparing to bring down the bird, but suddenly it dives towards their boat and without warning grabs hold of Luffy with its beak and proceeds to start flying off. Zoro, seeing this, freaks out and says, "Boy, get back here with my commander, you stupid bird," as he proceeds to chase the bird down while rowing the boat. About half an hour later, with Luffy still in its beak, the bird is flying over a town when suddenly it's shot at, so in the idea of self-preservation, the bird releases Luffy, and the boy crashes down into the center of the town. All of this is witnessed by a girl with orange hair wearing a white and blue striped t-shirt, orange skirt, and orange high-heeled sandals, who is hiding in an alleyway. Luffy gets up and dusts himself off and says, "Wow, that was different. Shishi." But now I don't know where I am. Shrugs. Oh well, I'll just walk around and ask someone where this is, then wait for Chief Zoro to come find me. With that in mind, the boy begins to wander around the town, quickly noticing that there's no one around and the town seems abandoned. Eventually he runs into the orange-haired girl and says, "Hello, I'm Minky D. Luffy. Who are you?" The girl looks at him strangely and says, "You're the guy who got dropped by the bird, aren't you? Wow, you must be strong to have survived a fall like that. My name is Nami, Master Navigator." The boy's eyes light up at this, and he says, "Are you really a navigator?" Nami nods and says, "Yep, best navigator in the East Blue." "Why?" He smiles and says, "Because I could use a navigator for my crew." She cocks her head at this and says, "You have a crew? What do you do?" The straw hat wearing boy says, "I'm a marine commander. And at the moment it's just me and Chief Petty Officer Zoro. But someday I'll have a huge ship and the strongest marine crew in the world, and then I'll become an admiral and protect the world from evil men and women. So what do you say, Nami-san? Will you join my crew and be our navigator?" Nami frowns at this and thinks, this guy is ambitious. But maybe I can use him to my advantage. Yeah, that's it. I'll hand him over to the Buggy Pirates claiming he's my boss, and then pretend to join Buggy, and when his back is turned I'll steal all his treasure. Suddenly she takes on a sad look and says, "I would love to join you, Luffy-san, however I can't." He cocks his head and says, "Why not?" She continues to look sad and says, "Because this town is currently controlled by a band of pirates, and these same pirates stole my treasure from me. But if you could get my treasure back, I'd join you in an instant." The boy becomes suspicious of this, but plays along and pretends to fall for the obvious ruse and says, "Alright then, that's what I'll do. I'll get your treasure back from the despicable pirates, and then you'll become my crew's navigator. Point me in the direction of these guys." She inwardly smiles at this and says, "I'll lead you to them. Follow me." He nods to her and follows her towards the pirates controlling the island. When they reach the pirates' camp near the docks, Nami stops Luffy and they hide behind a crate. She then points out that the funny-looking guy who is currently yelling at his crew is the captain of the pirate band. Luffy nods at this, recognizing the man as the 15 million Belai pirate Buggy the Clown. As they hear the man sing, "You're all useless. How hard could it be to find one stupid girl in a town like this? I swear I don't know why I put up with your incompetence." The crew is cowering, believing their captain is about to kill them, when suddenly they hear a voice behind them says, "Oh, are you pirates? Give Nami's treasure back before I kick your asses." All the pirates turn to see a boy in a straw hat, wearing black jeans, a red vest under a marine coat, and black leather combat boots, standing there with none other than the girl who stole their map behind him. The pirate captain smirks at this and says, "So girl, you decided to come face your death, huh? Or did you bring this marine with you thinking the two of you could take on Buggy the Clown?" Luffy begins cracking his knuckles when suddenly he gets hit in the back of the head with a staff and falls on ground face first, knocked out with Nami standing over him, which shocks the Buggy Pirates, as Nami says, "Actually I brought you my boss. He forced me to steal your map, but I thought if I brought him to you then I could join your crew, Buggy-sama." Buggy begins laughing at this. "You did, huh? Well then return my map and I'll let you join." Moji ties that bastard up and tosses him in the cage. A man wearing blue pants with a yellow sash and what appears to be a fur shirt with his hair styled like a teddy bear walks over and ties up Luffy, while Nami hands the map she stole back to Buggy. Buggy turns to his men and says, "Alright, this calls for a celebration. For the return of the map and the joining of a new member." The pirates all cheer at this, as Luffy is thrown in a metal cage and locked in, and the celebrations begin. Nami, while drinking and partying with the Buggy Pirates, is secretly plotting her next move. Eventually Luffy wakes up and sees all the pirates celebrating with food and drink and starts to salivate and says, "Damn it, they have to have lots of meat. Especially when I haven't eaten in over a day." Nami, seeing the straw hat wearing kid is awake, decides to go over to his cage and rub it in his face, already having planned to get the pirates drunk and easier to get out of her way. She walks over and says, "Oh, too bad you're stuck in that cage, this stuff is so good." To emphasize her point, she takes a bite of some meat and a huge gulp of rum to wash it down. However, her eyes whiten when the meat in her hand is taken, and the marine is standing right in front of her, out of the cage, eating it. Suddenly Buggy appears behind her and says, "I think it's time for this guy to die." Like so. With that, the huge cannon nearby turns towards the town. The fuse is lit, and a moment later a huge cannonball blows up an entire block of the town. After that, the cannon turns towards Luffy, who is suddenly back in the cage, as Buggy laughs and says, "Jahahaha. With all my cannons and special Buggy balls along with the help of my devil fruit powers and that map, I'll conquer the Grand Line." This surprises Nami, as she had no idea the clown was a devil fruit user, while Luffy is just bored meeting another fruit user from East Blue, but wonders what the man's power is. Buggy turns to Nami and says, "And, as a test of your loyalty, Navigator-san, you will be the one who fires the cannon and kills this stupid marine." He leads her over to the back of the cannon and hands her a torch and says, "All you have to do is light the fuse, and then boom. He dies in fantastic style." Jahahaha. The girl hesitates, as she thinks, crap. I never planned to kill anyone. This is insane. No, I won't do it. I won't become like those pirates. Having thought this, and the crew seeing her hesitation, one of the members steps up to her and says, "Here, let me show you how it's done, little miss." As he goes to grab the torch, she kicks him in the balls, then bashes him over the head and says, "Hands off, asshole." She turns to look at the boogie pirates, and she tosses the torch away, and she says, "No matter what, I'll never become a cruel pirate. Pirates killed the most important person in my life, so I'll never kill another soul." As she is making her stance, and talking to Boogie and his crew, Luffy notices that the fuse on the cannon has been lit because Nami accidentally threw the torch right on it. Acting fast, Luffy dematerializes his body, and escapes the cage. While Luffy is escaping from the cage, as the fuse burns, Nami finds herself under attack from the boogie pirates. She begins to fight them off using her staff, and is doing a pretty good job of it. Suddenly Zoro appears, as Luffy re-materializes next to him, and says, "There you are, Luffy. Damn it, do you know how hard it was to find you? Why did you have to go and get almost eaten by a blasted bird?" The buggy pirates hearing this turn to see the newcomer, and all pale when they realize that it's pirate hunter Urano Zoro, and then pale even more when they see the marine kid next to him, and not in the cage. However, the only one who doesn't pale is Buggy, as the man approaches the swordsman and straw hat wearing teen, and says, well pirate hunter Zoro. So have you finally come for my head?" Zoro looks at him, and says, "And you are?" All the buggy pirates face palm at this, while Buggy himself gains a tick mark on his head, and says, "I'm Buggy the Clown, captain of the buggy pirates, Scourge of the East Blue." Zoro takes a thinking pose, and says, "Oh, I remember now, you're worth 15 million, you're just a small fry." Buggy becomes enraged at this, and says, "Small fry, I'll show you a small fry. I'll kill you, and further cement my legend, as the man who killed the feared pirate hunter Urano Zoro." Jahahahaha. Zoro scowls at this, and places his left hand on one sword handle, and rushes Buggy incredibly fast, and cuts the man to pieces. This shocks Nami, while Luffy just smiles about it. However, the man's crew merely laughs at this, confusing everyone, but Zoro just brushes it off, and moves to stand back next to Luffy, when suddenly he feels pain in his side. He looks down to see a hand holding a knife there, and grunts, as the hand pulls the knife out, and floats back towards Buggy, who is floating behind the swordsman with an evil glint in his eyes, and says, "You can't kill me by slicing me to pieces. I have the power of the chop fruit. With it I can separate parts of my body, and can be sliced up because I'll just pull myself back together. Now die." Soon Zoro finds himself fighting the detached hand of the crazed clown pirate, and despite being injured is barely managing to defend against the disembodied hand, as he thinks to himself, "Great, I came to rescue the commander, but now it seems I'm the one in need of saving. Damn devil fruit users." Nami is in utter shock at these turn of events, and frozen to the spot, but everyone then hears, "Hey, big nose." Everyone stops, and turns to stare at the straw hat wearing boy, including Buggy, as the boy glares at him, and says, "You're real cowardly, you know that." Attacking Zoro from behind. "You're just a weakling pretending to be strong." Buggy's face turns red at this, and says, "I'll show you, coward, you marine brat. I'll kill you first." With that he sends out his hand at the boy to stab him. However, Luffy grabs the blade between his teeth, and breaks it, and says, "I'm going to kick your ass, and then place you under arrest in the name of justice, pirate Buggy." At this the clown-faced man and his entire crew laugh, as Luffy looks at the swordsman, and says, "Chief Zoro, get out of here. Go run away from here." This confuses Nami, however Zoro understands what his commander is saying, and proceeds to try to escape. However, Buggy is holding knives between all the fingers on his right hand, as he levels it at Zoro, and says, "Chop chop cannon," and launches the hand at Zoro. Zoro, thinking fast, rushes at the cannon, and turns it towards Buggy and his crew, and dives out of the way so the hand misses him. Nami, acting quickly, lights the now shorter fuse, and after a moment the cannon fires at the buggy pirates, causing a big explosion. Seeing the entire crew down for the count, Zoro rushes off, and makes a break for it with Nami right behind him. Meanwhile, Buggy's crew begins to get its bearings, and finds out that all three of them are gone. Buggy orders the crew to search the town for the three of them, and bring them to him to kill. Moji steps up riding on a lion, and asks, "Captain, would you mind if I found the pirate hunter, and killed him?" The man looks at his first mate, and his pet lion Richie, and says, "No, that's fine, Moji, just make sure you kill him in the most painful way possible." The man nods, and he takes off on the lion. Back with the three runaways, they stumble upon the mayor of the town, and a dog. The mayor offers to provide shelter for Zoro to recover from his wounds, and proceeds to tell Nami and Luffy about the dog, how it continues to guard its master's pet shop, even though it knows the master is dead, and suddenly the conversation is interrupted by Moji and Richie the lion. Fearing for their lives, Mayor Boodle and Nami escape, but leave Luffy there. Moji orders Richie to attack Luffy, which the enormous lion does by sending the boy through a house. Moji notices the pet shop, and decides to turn his attention towards it. However, the dog, Chow Chu, proceeds to try to defend the shop, and is continuously batted away by the lion, and in the end is not able to beat the lion, and lays defeated. Luffy comes back into the area after recovering from being sent through a house, and sees the pet shop burned to the ground, and notices the dog is heartbroken. He clenches his fists, and walks towards the lion, and his master, and says, "Hey you. Why did you burn down that shop? That shop meant the world to that dog. So why couldn't you leave it alone?" Seeing the boy back, and relatively unharmed shocks Moji, but the man says, "I don't need a reason, I felt like burning it to the ground so I did. What are you going to do about it, brat?" Luffy glares, and says, "I'm going to make you pay for that in the name of justice." Moji orders Richie to attack the straw hat wearing boy again, and, as the lion rushes him, Luffy cocks his fist back, and just, as Richie pounces, Luffy moves slightly, and plants his fist solidly in the beast's gut, sending it flying along with its rider crashing into a house. The lion is knocked unconscious, however the rider isn't. As he crawls out from under his pet, he begins to cry. "Richie." Richie woke up. "Come on, Richie." After a few moments he turns and glares at Luffy, and says, "You'll pay for hurting my Richie." He takes out a whip, and proceeds to crack it at Luffy, however said boy merely catches the end of it, and pulls hard, sending the animal tamer flying towards him, cocks his fist back, and when the man is in range brings it forward straight into his face, smashing the man into the ground, and saying, "Shut up." After knocking Buggy's first mate out easily, to the shock of Nami and Boodle, the boy walks over, taking the last box of dog food from the store, and gives it to the dog while smiling at it, and saying, "Here you go boy, don't be sad, I'll make these guys pay for what they've done to this town. They'll all be arrested, and thrown into impel down, this I promise on my honor, as a marine." Boodle, feeling inspired by Luffy, stands up, and goes to rush off, intent on confronting Buggy. Before Nami and Luffy can go after the old man, a cannonball passes them by, and impacts Boodle's house where Zoro is. Nami covers her mouth in shock at this, as she believes it's impossible that the swordsman survived, while Luffy just looks on, as if he hasn't a care in the world. Suddenly the ruble begins to shift and move, and out of it comes Zoro scratching his head, and yawning, as he says, "Well, that's a hell of a way to ruin a man's map." Luffy smiles, and says, "Feeling any better, Chief Petty Officer Zoro?" The green-haired man looks at him, and says, "Ah, bit Commander Luffy, I see you've been busy." Nami's jaw drops at this, but she quickly shakes it off, and says, "Stop standing there talking like a couple of morons. We have to go save the mayor or else he'll be killed." Luffy and Zoro both look at her seriously, as Zoro says, "Don't get your panties in a bunch, girly, we'll go save the old guy." Luffy nods at this, as he places his straw hat back on his head firmly, and says, "Yeah, and I'll kick the big nose's ass while I'm at it, and show him not to mess with the Marines." The girl huffs, and says, "Well then let's get going. We got a mayor to save, and a pirate crew to destroy." And with that the three unlikely allies head off towards the direction of the Buggy Pirates camp, and the final battle for Orange Town. Thanks for watching my video, leave a like if you enjoyed my video, and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. See you next time, till then sayonara.